Hello everyone, my name is Paul Andrew and welcome back to another video on creating a metadata-driven processing framework for Azure Data Factory and hopefully very soon Azure Synapse Analytics. So in this video I want to focus on a new feature that was added in version 1.9.2 of the processing framework called batch executions. So this was a new feature added, and what I want to do in this video is give you a demonstration of how that feature works and hopefully how you can use it within your environment. So let's jump in. So let's start off and go into our browser, and if you haven't already done so, visit the URL procfwk.com, which will redirect you to the GitHub pages and the documentation for the processing framework. On the contents page, if you have a look at batch executions or execution batches, so this is the feature we're talking about, and this is the thing that I want to demonstrate for you. Now, the key thing here to understand is that what the batch executions will allow you to do is to call the parent pipeline within the processing framework, but do so concurrently and do so for different batches of metadata that you have in your database. So hopefully, as the visual shows you here, you could call the parent for batch number 1, batch number 2, batch number 3, and you could do all of those things now in concurrently within the framework if you wish. So that main sort of limitation we had, whereby the processing framework can only be triggered, say, once for everything you want to do, it can now be triggered multiple times at the same time and controlled by this new concept of batches and configured with the metadata below it. So batches, hopefully, as it suggests here, is a hierarchy, is a level now that sits within the metadata above execution stages. So let's take a look at it and let's set it up basically. Let's give it a go. So if I jump into Management Studio, I've got a fairly vanilla deployment of my database project here. It's got the default metadata in it, or what I call the default metadata, which is all the stuff that I use in my development environment. And now, as part of that default metadata, I hit edit there, you'll see this new batches table. So hopefully a common use case for batch executions might be if we wanted to do something, say, hourly or daily, and we could have separate scheduled triggers within our data factory to do that. So I'm going to go with hourly and daily. Of course, you can use batch executions for whatever you like, but we've got some default metadata there to get us started. The next thing you'll want to include, or it's included in the default metadata, is a connection between our batch information and our stage executions. So we can have a one-to-one or a one-to-many here, or however you wish to configure it, but a stage is not limited to being used with one batch, and by extension its underlying worker pipelines as well. So you could have a very generic worker pipeline used for many different stages, connected to different batches, calling them all concurrently and driving those workers with parameters or whatever you need to do. So we've got some default metadata, but the kind of the key thing that we want to do if we're setting this up and using it is go into our properties table, and we have this new property called use execution batches, and I'm just going to set that to 1. So by default, this of course is turned off. And that means that when it's turned off, it'll make absolutely no difference to how your processing framework instance behaves and what you've been used to. So there's no breaking changes here. So let's enable that. I'm just going to reduce the timing on this slightly for my infant duration checks, just to make it a bit more demo friendly. Yeah, that's fine. Let's store the SPN details in the database. And I think I've already got those set up for my workers. Yes, I have. And then let me just jump into my stages table. So what I've done is for the dev database, I've added this this new execution stage called speed, the speed layer maybe. That's disabled by default. So I'm just going to enable that execution stage. And in my pipelines table, what you'll now see in here, I've taken my weight 1, 2, 3, and 4 workers, so the same workers that I've already got up here for execution stage number 1, and I'm actually just now reusing them for stage number 5, that speed execution stage, as I've called it, which is then going to be wrapped up into my execution batch that I've called it hourly. So let's just enable these as well. So you can do this as well if you want to have a play. So we're all good to go. Let me just check my precursor store procedure again, just to try and keep this demo friendly. Yeah, let's just have some defaults, very small weight parameters. So we're good to go there. And what I'm going to do now is my handy selects. Let's just grab that and grab that. So what we'll now get, and what you'll see when I trigger this, is we have our current execution table that we've always had, but we now get this batch execution table as well. So what I can do is I can go into my parent pipeline, and the parent pipeline now has this new pipeline parameter called batch name, which of course it comes from that metadata that I just showed you. So the idea being, if not obvious, we could add a trigger to our parent or to our grandparent. This is persisted in the grandparent as well, that batch name. So we can run that parent, we can trigger it multiple times, and we can pass in that batch name, and it can go and do its thing for that batch. If you're wondering, the check if the parent pipeline is running, that is also batch execution aware. So it's not going to throw an error if there's multiple parent pipelines running. It will also inspect that batch name parameter, and if the batch name is different, it will allow that new parent instance to continue. So what I'm going to do is, sorry, just one more thing I've remembered. I'm going to update my pipeline parameters. I'm going to use my intentional error. I'm just going to force that failure that you've probably seen me do before. Sorry, so let's trigger this parent. Let's trigger it for my daily batch, as I've called it, which can kick off, and we'll just give that a few moments. So that parent is now running with that daily batch name, and we will, of course, in our database, once that execution wrapper kicks in, there we go, we get the usual sort of metadata. But what you'll now see is that in the batch execution table, we also now get information as well. So we're now running this daily batch. Good. So what I can now do is, if I wanted, I can now come in here, I can trigger my parent again. This time I'm going to trigger it for the hourly batch. So what you'll see is in the monitoring, let's just filter it for that parent. So you can now see I've got two parent pipelines in progress, one for the daily batch, one for the hourly batch. So if I turn my attention to the database, you'll see that the daily one has kicked off, it's running. You'll see it's doing that new validation step, which is a new thing as part of the infant. I posted another video a little bit earlier today actually on what that validation is doing, so do check out that one as well. So what we're now seeing here as well is the hourly batch has kicked off. So we now have this running status for the hourly batch as well. And you'll see in the current execution table, we now have two different local execution IDs, which of course relate to the batches above them. So we've got that execution stage 5, just for demo purposes, which is the hourly ones, which is doing that set of workers. And we have the daily one running as well. So these two batches that are now running concurrently, they are, for all intents and purposes, completely independent as far as Data Factory is concerned. The metadata, of course, yes, is coming from the same place in the database, but then the pipelines that they're running within the Data Factory, they are very independent, very disconnected. Obviously, lots of boilerplate code there and reuse of things. So what we'll do is we'll just give this a few more refreshes. You'll see that my daily execution batch now has this new status of stopping. And the reason for that, as you'll probably be aware, is that the execution stage number 1, that intentional error procedure and pipeline that I use, of course, has failed. But we then still have something left in that batch. So the batch has got this status of stopping. That's because it knows a failure has occurred, and it's just waiting for that execution stage to finish. Once it has finished, what we'll see is that it'll get a status of stopped. Interestingly, what you'll have also perhaps noticed is that now my hourly execution batch is also is actually now finished. So the content for that hourly batch has gone from my current execution table, and that has now, of course, been persisted to my long-term execution log. And that hourly batch has now got a status of success. My daily one is still stopping, or now stopped. Okay, so it's now caught up. And we're now very much in a sort of a simple failure handling state that we're perhaps used to, where our intentional error has failed and everything downstream of it, the preceding execution stages have been blocked. So just to bring it home really with that independent set of batches, I'll fix my fake error with that parameter change. And then what I'll do is within my Data Factory monitoring, my parent that failed, which of course was the daily one, I'm just going to rerun that. But actually, maybe while that daily parent is being rerun to fix whatever occurred, maybe another hourly job kicks off. Okay, maybe we've got another new hourly batch that occurs in here as well. So we come back to our monitoring, and what we now see is we've got two parents running again, one for the new hourly execution and one for that reran parent that of course intentionally failed. So if we come back to our two tables in Management Studio, my daily batch, it's restarting, it's cleaning up, it's doing what the framework generally does here. With that restart, you'll notice that the status of stopped, that's now been reset as well to a status of now running. So that's daily batch is restarting, it's doing what it needs to. And we also now have a third batch line in here because of course I triggered that hourly one to run again. So you'll see more records in my current execution table for that second hourly run. What I'll do, I'll just leave these things to play out. I'll just pause the video temporarily, and then when we come back, we'll hopefully we'll have everything complete and everything succeeded. We'll do the same thing again, but then we'll just look at overriding that restart behavior as well. So we are back. We have fast forwarded in time, and my daily batch run is just coming to an end. You'll see the final worker pipeline is now running. You'll also notice that that second hourly batch has also completed successfully. So we'll just wait for this one to finish off. Then of course my execution table will get emptied and persisted to my log, and we will then have those 3 successful batch runs in here as well. Let's just have a look at Data Factory to see if that's wrapping up. According to that, it is done. There we go. So 3 successful batches and empty execution table. So what I'm going to do now is I just want to do that once more, but I'm going to force that intentional error again. Let's just trigger, in theory, another daily batch. And let's straight away trigger another hourly batch. So we get the wheels spinning on 2 parent pipelines once more. And of course, you saw I set my intentional error flag. But this time what I'm going to do is, within my properties table, I'm going to say that I want to override the restart when that failure occurs. So my daily is running, and my hourly, my third hourly, is now running as well. What I'll perhaps do as well, just while we're waiting for that, I'll just show you another feature as we're demoing things here. Let me try and now trigger another hourly batch. We of course already have an hourly batch running. So let's see what happens if we now trigger another one. Because although batches can run concurrently, we don't want batches of the same name to try and run concurrently. That would of course be bad. So it'll be this one up here. So what's now happened is that of course I tried to trigger that batch again with that same batch name, but of course my already running pipeline check has stepped in, and it said no, we can't do that. Even using its batch awareness, so it's got the pipeline runs, it's filtered it to runs that are running for 2 of them, but because it then knows that the batch execution flag is set within the properties table, it also then goes one further and says, okay, I've got 2 running pipelines. Are either of those then related to the actual batch execution that I'm interested in, which is what this extra if condition within this pipeline's for. So it will then also filter the results on that batch name, inspecting the parameter that's passed to that pipeline when it was triggered. So, just a sort of digression there into what that would look like. So let's check out my tables again. My third hourly batch has completed, and my second daily batch is stopping. Of course, you'll see that failure. Once that infant returns and catches up, we will go from stopping to stopped. There we go. And we should have in the data factory monitoring portal, we should have that parent just finishing up. Yeah, done. So it's checked for its blockers. Sorry, my throat's very dry today. I've been recording lots of things. So that parent's failed as we expect. But what of course I'm now going to do is let's just trigger, because we set the override restarts to 1, so we don't care about trying to restart. Let's just run another hourly batch just for fun, just because we can. And let's say I want a new daily batch now. I don't care about restarting what you did before. So once again, let's get the wheels spinning on 2 concurrent parent pipelines, which they are. So let's just do another refresh in here. Let's see what the database is going to do. So we've got that stopped status, remember, from that previously failed batch, and we have that in our current execution table. Let's just F5 again. You'll see that what we're up to now, that 4th hourly batch has started again. Obviously nothing too interesting there. Okay, so this is the thing that I wanted to show you. That that second daily batch, because we set our override restart status to 1, what the framework has done is it's abandoned that batch. So we get that status of abandoned in the batch execution table. And you'll now see a third instance of the daily batch running with its associated metadata in the current execution table. So hopefully now with that restartability, with that concurrency that we have here as well, with that disconnection between our batches and our execution stages, the framework now really gives us that sort of final piece to the puzzle that was missing when it comes to handling these things. We have that restart behavior. We can abandon if we wish. We can do many batches now concurrently. So it's not just limited to 2 that I'm demonstrating here. We of course could trigger our parent pipeline now for lots of things, and then we get all of that richness that the framework gives us within then the scope of that batch execution that's happening. Of course, the current execution table is going to get quite crowded then at that point if you've got lots of things happening. But what I've done is in my testing, I've now, where I had my 300 workers, which was kind of the old benchmark test that I had before, using 2 concurrent batches, I've now extended that to 600 workers. So 2 batches, 300 workers each, running with the same environment, just to see how things cope, to see how the Azure resource and compute gets on in the functions and things underneath. And I'm fairly pleased to say that everything worked out fine. The 2 concurrent batches, each with 300 workers, they all behaved as expected. The database barely felt it actually. It just did what it needed to, and everything was all good. So hopefully that concludes the demos. I'm not going to, of course, restart that one. I just wanted to show you the concurrent batches, but also the concurrent batches in conjunction with that restart behavior that we're used to as well. And do go and check out the documentation page on it. Hopefully it's explained there, and hopefully that extra level of execution and that concept above execution stages now really sort of helps you out in using the framework. I'll have put a link to this document in the description. Thanks so much, everybody. See you again soon.